And we're here at the Food Bank Farm at 121 Bay Street, Bay Road, Hadley, Mass. And I'm interviewing Michael Doctor. If you could start out by, excuse me, telling. I want to hear about where you grew up and your family background. Whatever family history you know.
I grew up outside of Washington, D.C. in Kensington, Maryland, and my mother was from Philadelphia, first generation. Parents from Poland and Russia, immigrated in the 19 teens, I guess. And my dad immigrated on his 5th birthday from Hamburg, Germany. His dad was thrown in jail the night before, and they finally realized that maybe this whole recent developments might affect them too, even though they were lawyers and not particularly Jewish, and so they got out in the 11th hour. So I grew up in we bounced back and forth mostly to a conservative synagogue, once in a while to reform one, and hated it. Have awful memories of all the conspicuous consumption in fancy cars and devoid of anything that I could relate to going on at synagogue. Still hate going in a synagogue. Even though I go to every once in a while I'll go to our synagogue, which is a pretty progressive Amherst synagogue. It just don't like the building or something. But anyway, but still I'm very committed to raising my kids Jewish and having some Jewish identity. And for me, what that means is more of a cultural definition and somewhat religious, but most importantly just from a justice point of view, and knowing that Jews, that our Jews, as Jews, we've gone through a lot, and there are people that are being oppressed today, and sort of acknowledging that and doing something about it, and acknowledging the fact that my grandmother from Russia, went out after all the potatoes had been picked in the field and found the ones that were left, and that's sort of been that way. I learned that very young. My parents and grandparents told that story to me, and really knocked home for me that hunger's only a generation away in my family, and it's something that's very real for us. And I grew up in a fairly comfortable, middle class background. My parents were, lawyers, and so yeah. So is that caterer here? Rage, the caterer. So that's been sort of a driving force for me in terms of like doing social justice work, and environmental work, and did a lot of some community organizing and housing development work when I first got out of school.
It was interesting when you were just talking about your grandparents telling you about the thing with potatoes. What kinds of things did you grow up hearing about their lives before they came here?
Well, I guess my grandma and my grandfather came from what sounded like slightly different socioeconomic backgrounds within the Jewish community. They were from different towns, I think. I mean, he had like a mill of some sort where people would bring grain, so they obviously weren't starving, and my grandmother, on the other hand, had a big family, and so life was probably more challenging from them. They didn't talk. They either didn't talk, or I don't remember too much about it. I have one uncle who was remembers being shot at by various pogroms and whatever else, but some of his credibility's always been high. So my grandma was part of this big family, and they'd never had much money or food, and so they definitely scrambled around in the fields to get whatever potatoes were left by the potato farmers out there. And so those were the stories that we grew up on. Of course, when she came to this country, she was a real hard worker. I guess she had 7 brothers and sisters, and they all eventually made it into the New York, Philadelphia area. And during the Depression, the story was that they were all laid off except her, and she, was a seamstress, and she kept the sewing machines going for like 4 people. We're doing the work of 4 people, and she never got laid off during the Depression. She was the last person to be still working, and she kind of supported everybody and put one of her brothers through dental school, and or helped do that. And so, so hard work, and just that was always, I guess, something that I must have picked up on, just because.
Well, that's interesting to me because it's something you hear from a lot of the people who grew up here, the farm families here. Very much the same work ethic.
Right. Which is interesting because those are the few Jewish families that have some kind of work ethic, labor ethic. I think everybody else sort of bought into what is more of a predominant Jewish norm, which is that works for other people, and we have to figure out how to raise ourselves, kids, whatever, so that they become doctors and lawyers, and that they don't actually have to work for a living or do hard labor, because there's definitely something wrong with you if you do that. You weren't able to figure your way out of the immigrant stature or whatever if you still are working or went back to working, and to a certain extent that's reflective, obviously, in our larger culture, in the sense that work is definitely not looked on favorably by anybody in our culture, especially Jewish people. And that's, that's what we do here, is we work, and we get dirty, and we work really hard, and we do what my grandmother did, which is work for 3 or 4 people, especially on this farm, because, we do give away half what we grow, and we do that without any grant money or subsidies or any other sources of income. We give away half what we grow, basically, by being very productive, and we still support our family and pay our crew, favorably.
How did you get from where you were geographically, but also how did you sort of evolve towards being a farmer?
Yeah, well, growing up, I remember looking out, driving on family vacations and seeing fields of things, and just being very curious and excited, and with my mom too, we would figure out what was growing there, and just kind of felt a real connection to agriculture always, but never had a clue that I could make a living doing it, that I could ever get access to land and equipment, and most importantly, knowledge of how to actually get a crop out of the ground. So it was a long process. Eventually I stumbled upon this community-supported agriculture model, and realized that I could make a living farming, and in fact could actually give away a lot of food, which is what we wanted to do by doing this CSA, which is a pretty lucrative way of doing farming, because you're selling direct to your consumer, you're getting close to a retail dollar, and yet it's a farm product, and so most farms get 10 or 20 cents on the dollar, and we're capturing 80 or 90 cents on the dollar, so we're making a profit. We're turning that profit into surplus food, which we give away to the food bank, essentially. That doesn't answer your question. It's a good thing you're going to write all this down. I can bounce around like crazy. But in terms of my evolution from a gardener to a farmer, growing up, my mom and I always had big vegetable gardens, and I haven't really gone very far. We sort of did what I do now, which is we gave a lot of food away, and usually to people who needed it, the janitor at the school or whatever, and that was just kind of something that we did a lot of, and we always rented big plots, and then we had a lot of vegetables growing around our house too. My brother would plant flowers, I would rip up the flower beds, put the vegetables in. There was our little competition going on. One year my mom and I planted sweet corn in the front yard, and we were talking about the suburbs of Washington, D.C., where we have perfectly manicured lawns, and we did it mostly to just get a rise out of the neighbors, and we did. We succeeded in doing that very much so. They wrote us a letter, one of the neighbors wrote us a little letter from the Rock Creek Hills Civic Association, spelled association wrong. My mom knew exactly who the anonymous letter was from and put it back in their mailbox, and then they tried to get
and they're just complaining that you're you
put
weren't
with corn in the
managing
front yard.
yeah.
You know, I mean, it's maybe in the Grass family, but not to them. And I mean, we had a lot of friends in the neighborhood too, and that's who got the corn. But when we were all done, but a lot of people were just really upset. They called the Department of Environmental Protection in this county and were afraid, you know, trying to say that we were breaking some rules. And then they called the Department of Transportation, and because we were blocking visibility, and of course everybody else had their shrubs out there too. And eventually the Sentinel, which was the local county paper at the time, which is out of business now, they sent a reporter out with like a camera with a wide-angle lens and, made it look like some Minnesota row of corn or something like that. And we had fun with it. Picked some nice corn, had a good time. And the next year, I think we planted asparagus or something, just along the grass theme, I guess. So we had a lot of vegetables, a lot of gardens growing up, and I didn't think I could really make a living farming. And then a dear friend of mine who's now passed away 2 years, he and I went to grad school in community economic development together in New Hampshire. And I had finished doing some work in low-income housing development work in Philadelphia. When I graduated college, Oberlin College in Ohio, I went to Philly and worked for some neighborhood groups and some nonprofit housing developer. And we did like low-income housing stuff, and that was my background. And I pretty much hated it. I hated being in the city and sitting at a desk, and I just thought that was something that I should be doing. As opposed to something that I really love doing. So I met this guy, Ricky Fogel, at a grad program in community economic development, and came home to a big party in Western Massachusetts, and moved to this area.
What was that?
That was in mid to late 87, somewhere around there.
That's when I got here.
Yeah. And picked up a year or 2 years worth of like odd carpentry jobs and stuff like that. And then Ricky told me about this project that was starting at the food bank called the Chili Project, where somebody had this idea they were going to grow the ingredients to make a vegetarian chili, the beans, the tomatoes, peppers, and everything. And so I got involved in it, and eventually sort of with an older farmer woman who had grown up across the street here, we sort of took that project over from the Hampshire College professors, who we thought were going to kind of screw it up pretty good, and we were definitely not off base on that, and kind of turned it into a real. I sort of eventually got hired by the food bank, went from being a volunteer coordinator very quickly to being a part-time employee of the food bank to turn this chili project. We were growing all the ingredients to make a vegetarian chili, freezing it, and then distributing it through the food bank on Hampshire College ground. We did that for 3 years, and I liked what I was doing. I liked growing food. I liked giving it away. But I wanted to, my background was in community economic development. I wanted to make the thing financially self-sustaining so that I didn't have to, beg for money every year to make it happen. And, funders get bored after a couple of years. It's, nutrition 1 year, and it's drugs another year, and the year after that it's childhood development or whatever, So I didn't want to play that game forever, so I wanted to make the thing, sustain itself. So I looked at a variety of different business models. Thought about selling the chili. The only problem was the chili is that nobody liked it. So that really wasn't an option. I looked at this CSA model, which was in its infancy at the time. There were a lot of CSAs that were on a very small garden economy of scale. And, we sort of scratched our head here and looked around at the agricultural resources of this valley and the old-timers who knew how to farm and grow lots of food and the good land that we have here, and figured we could take that little gardening model and turn it into a real farm and make it work. And if we scaled it up, the biggest farm at the time was 80 or 100 shares. We figured if we could go to, 300 or 250 or 300 shares, we could hit a real financial break-even point and spin off enough food to give it away to the food bank. So that's kind of what we did. And
how many acres on the farm?
we currently have about 50 acres under till in vegetables right now.
Uh-huh.
Food bank owns about 35 to 40 of those acres, and then I lease out the rest of the acreage. Just to give you an orientation of how the farm is structured, it is the food bank farm. It's a project of the Food Bank of Western Massachusetts. I started it as an employee of the food bank, and it eventually got spun off. And so I operate a company, a private company, that manages the farm. And we pay the food bank in 40 to 50% of what we grow goes to the food bank. That's part of our lease, and then all the operating costs, we pay off their mortgage and insurance and all the other direct costs, which comes to about $20,000 a year that we pay to them in cash. And then after that, the business is essentially ours. If we can make a buck at it, it's ours. And I deliberately set the farm up and had them spin us off in that way because I really... the farm, if it was going to be successful, had to be run like a business, and it was being run like a business, only it had this sort of non-profit ownership structure that I didn't think over the long term was going to be conducive to its long-term survival. And so I felt in order to farm and successfully, somebody's neck has to be on the line, so I decided to put mine on the line.
You mentioned, collaborating with this woman who grew up here, and I remember earlier on you were telling me about, what you'd heard about, kids who grew up on the farm.
Yeah, she was one of the exceptions. She loved farming.
In general, can you talk about how and what you've learned from these farmers who preceded you in this area?
I learned everything that I know from these farmers that preceded me. There were 2 or 3 people that in the early years, that I would constantly call for advice. There was one guy who died 2 weeks ago, who would come by 2 or 3 times a week and just order me around, in the early years. And that's, he was a fabulous guy. And that's where I really learned how to cultivate. And I learned a lot of stuff from Carolyn, who grew up across the street here as well in the early years. She really got me to the point where I could talk to somebody like Mike. So another old Polish guy across the river who's a real good tractor mechanic, I learned a lot from him. So that was really what my friend Ricky taught me, about life, is that, is to, get to be collaborative, get information from people who know, ask questions, and a lot of growers that were moving into the organic movement when I was, who had to learn how to farm organically, really didn't know how to relate to some of these old timers who had used pesticides, and like Mike Talega, who just passed away. I went over to his, his farm years ago when I was first starting and said, I heard he'd used this particular tractor that I wanted to learn how to use. I said, I hear you had an Alice G, when you were farming. I was wondering if you could teach me how to use it. We're not going to use herbicides. I need a tractor like that, because we're not using any. And he came back the next day and he said, yeah, you can, I'll teach you how to use that G. You just have to use herbicides. And I said, okay, and I changed the subject, and we became great friends. And so kind of having a moral and ideological compass has been real important to guide me through my life. But wearing it on my shoulders is something I've never tried to do, and so that's enabled me to really bring a lot of these old timers in and become friends with them and learn a lot from them. Yeah. So.
And do you find that there's it sounds like you inherited the values that you needed to do as you've done. You've inherited, maybe from, you were talking about your grandmother. Do you see these old farm families having practiced a similar?
In terms of giving stuff away,
the giving or just
well, most of them just struggled to really survive. But one of the eulogies at Mike's funeral was, he hated when people would come by and steal shit out of his jar or food off of his stand, but if anybody asked him for anything, he'd give it to him, automatically, So, these are all generous people, they're all people but also people that struggled and didn't have a lot to give, but what they had was food, and food was pretty easy to give usually. So, when you give away food, you're just giving away some seeds. It's all the marketing and distribution and whatever else. That's where all the value is. So.
Yeah. I think you mentioned when we got started, just we were talking about being of a secular background, but you said something about having sort of a strong cultural sense of Jewishness, and I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about what that has meant to you.
It's really simple for me. I try to find out where it is. It's got to be deeper than this, but I'm just a simple guy, I guess. It's just, I'm a Jew. and I come from this group of people that have been through a fair amount of oppression, and to deny that in any way would be really wrong for me. And so, but that's as far as it can take it for me religiously. That, okay, so I'm a Jew, big deal, what the fuck does that mean? I don't know. We do Shabbos dinner on Friday nights, when we get around to it, and as often as we can, and it's really nice. Do I enjoy going to synagogue? Absolutely not. Do I believe anything I've ever read in synagogue? No way. Do I like some of the people who go there? Yeah. I don't know what the hell they're doing there. I don't know what the hell I'm doing there when I go there. But
you said that your son.
My son's devout, man. He is he's in there.
How did that happen?
One family, the Rothenberg Hirsch, Amy Rothenberg, she's the best Jew around that I know, and we've been dear friends with him for a long time, and she is a committed Jew. She is from a very beautiful spiritual place, and she definitely made sure that my Benny, and to a certain extent Jesse, had an exposure to a good Jewish upbringing, because it didn't have much to do with me. I mean, I suppose I, sent him to Hebrew school, and we do some things too. But she was, I'm exaggerating. She was just really made it a positive thing for our whole family, in a really healthy way.
Good. I'm not sure. I don't think I have any other big questions to ask. So, unless there's something else that I feel like.
No.
Well, here's a question. How does, I don't know, how much of your extended family is still out there, wherever in the suburbs of Washington, but how do they feel about what you have done?
They think that I work too hard and don't make enough money, and I think that about them too, or I think that about my mom anyway. But they're finally retiring. But no, they have a deep appreciation for food and good, clean food, and it's kind of, my mom's an incredible cook, and really always bought from farmers, and my dad just loves good food, and so there's a real, they have a real connection there. I think they kind of, they've definitely respect it. They wish I didn't work as hard, maybe, but and everybody else, my whole family tree is pretty much lawyers or judges, just in every direction. Cousins and aunts and uncles and brothers and moms, dads, everybody. So. And I like law. I feel like, when farmers are in situations where they have to negotiate with a nonprofit that might own land, and I've done it here. I love it when they call me, and so there's parts of law that really interest me, and I gravitate to, but I just a lot happier farming. So, and my folks, and Lynn and I built a house right here off the property, so they come up in the summertime and be super grandparents, and we rent it out to students in the wintertime, and so we get to see them a lot, and they get to enjoy the farm. So.
Great. All right.
Is that it? That's great. Good. That was easy.
Yeah, is there something else? I just had another question pop into my mind. I guess, maybe if I turn this off, at least in Hadley, this is a historically agricultural area. Besides the these old timers that you mentioned, sort of consulting with, do you feel like, are you, as the farmer here at the Food Bank Farm, are you part of a sort of a group of farmers in Hadley? Do you get together with these other...
most of these farmers don't socialize a lot, but I guess, remarkably, to me anyways, that I'm definitely a peer, and I respect a lot of the farmers in the farm community, and they respect me, and we trade information fairly readily when there's, call each other if we have a different expertise on something. But I really made a point to kind of, be kind of accepted in the farming community. When we first came here, the food bank bought the land from Charlie Nabala, who was from the Callahans, which is an old Irish family that had the property for 100 years, and it had been rented out to this guy named Charlie Nabala, who was a Polish farmer down the road. And he was ripshit that he was not. And this is some good land here, by the way. This is some of the best Hadley loam and Hadley loam is some of the best soil in the world. Mm-hmm. And he was a little ripped that some nonprofit was coming in to take his land.
Have wanted?
Well, he couldn't afford to buy it. Not at what we were able to put together with the state buying the development rights and put on the table. And but he just was pissed that we were going to come in and probably waste this land, by some silly nonprofit that wasn't a real farm. And he's a good friend. He comes over. We talk, and he's a good guy, and he loves us, and we like him. And it's we got past that after a few years. And the only thing that changed, I think, the relationship is that he saw that we worked, and that we weren't just goofing off, and that we were doing a pretty good job, and that we weren't just like sucking some government loan or some government grant or something like that to make it happen. That we were actually like a real farm. And so once that happened, he got over all of his animosity, and I think a lot of the farmers in town did too. Now they might be a little bit jealous because we're like, we're making a decent living at, we're selling a lot of food and getting a good price for it.
Are you? I know I said I was done, but now I'm thinking about other things. Are you growing I'm guessing that you grow a wider variety.
Oh yeah,
of stuff.
Yeah, they're growing potatoes and corn and maybe cabbage if they're real daring, and potatoes. And we're growing, we order 200 different seed varieties every year, 50 different crops, so it's very different in that regard. In terms of our crop mix, but farming's farming. It's not that different. Organic agriculture went on for a long time in this country before they invented pesticides. And so what I was able to do was talk to a lot of these old timers and pull out a lot of the equipment out of their barns and get it to work. From that's all my tractors were made in the 40s. Before they invented herbicides, and most of our cultivators are as well. So they just to relearn how a lot of this equipment works in the field and allows you to do things that a lot of the modern tractors don't, because they're all 3-point hitch and they're all rear operated in the back where you can't see what you're doing, and you don't want to see it anyway because you're spraying, and whereas the older stuff has belly mounted equipment and you can really tickle it with your toe and see it and get real close to your crop. Kill.
Do you, besides those, the 2 goats I saw, do you have any livestock? Or
no, we have some chickens. All that's a petting zoo. It's just for the kids to see. We had a couple pigs last year. They're kosher pigs. We finished them off for the last 6 weeks with like a donated about 1,000 pounds of organic oats that were kosher and organic that got donated to the farm. So these are the only kosher pigs that I know about. But that was more of a petting zoo. Although we actually slaughtered the pigs because they get nasty when they get big. We did raise a couple hundred chickens one year, and every year I'm tempted to emulate the folks down in Vineland, New Jersey, in some fashion, and do chickens, because chickens just for the most part are not done right in this country, and the problem is it's just really expensive to do it right. And if you put them on pasture and you let them eat some greens and you move them every day, and you can crank out a fabulous product. And we did that for a couple of years, and it just was the best chicken we ever, and so we'd do it again for another year, even though it was awful to do. We just weren't set up for it. And some year we might go back to that.
All right. I'll turn it off. What do you do during the wintertime?
Well, winter doesn't last too long because we're still distributing vegetables to the middle of December. And then we take some time out, and we got to do seed orders and crop plans and such. But, so it's light duty stuff for end of December, January, February. March, we're starting to go back, get stuff going again. And what do? We try to travel, see the world a little bit. We've taken the kids down to Guatemala or Mexico a bunch of times, and hope to get back down there as much as we can.
So you're not set. You don't have a sugar bush?
No. We try not to. My friend Dan Kaplan, who's the other Jewish farmer in the valley, he and I had a cartel going for a long time that we would never do a winter share. And just this spring, he called me up and says he's going to do it. So he's going to do a greenhouse and roots. So here goes. We'll probably have to work in the winter now because we've been sort of been the dog wagging his farm for several years and having to constantly keep up with us. And now he's going to turn around and get us back, basically.
Yeah.
But I don't, you know, if we do winter share, I'll sub that out and let somebody else run it because I need some time off in the winter. You know, spend some time with the family.
All right. Well, thanks a lot.
Thank you. It's good to talk to you.
Yeah.
Hope you get what you need.